Chapter 25. After amazing the medical staff with my quick recovery, we left the hospital a few days later, as a family, and headed home. JD carried Hope's car seat into my apartment. I guess I can start moving some of my things in here now, huh? Oh my, we didn't even think about that. I laughed as I realized all the changes I would need to make. I'm going to need to make some room in my closet. It's okay, I didn't bring that much with me. But we're going to need to discuss whether we plan on staying here or moving to New York. His words gave me pause. I hadn't even thought about that when I had accepted his proposal. I had been so excited, but Texas was my home, and I couldn't imagine Hope growing up in New York. My gaze traveled to the floor and I bit my lip. How could I tell him I didn't want to leave? Don't worry, he said, and touched my arm. We'll pray about it. I nodded and picked Hope up from the car seat, settling her against my chest. As I carried her around the apartment, I pointed everything out to her. And here's your room. Pink and purple flowers and butterflies adorned the lavender walls, along with the wooden letters H-O-P-E. Hope smiled and yawned, so I laid her down in the crib and left the room. JD's arms enfolded me as I stepped into the living room. It was a tight, secure feeling that I had missed. When he released me, he moved his hands to my face. Are you okay for a bit if I go and grab a few things from my place? As much as I wanted him to stay, I was tired myself and looking forward to sleeping in my actual bed. JD rubbed his thumb over my lip and then followed it with a soft kiss. I'll be back as soon as I can. As he left, I crawled into bed and closed my eyes. I didn't regret having Hope for a minute, but I hadn't realized how tiring being a new mother would be. JD climbed in his rental car. Now that Hope was here and Callie was awake, there were a lot of things they had to figure out. Even if they stayed in Mesquite, they would need a bigger place soon, and a bigger car. JD didn't really miss New York, but he did wonder what would happen to his father's business if he left the running of it up to others. Could he manage it long distance? He did have the board members, and they had been running everything anyway. JD sighed. He had always thought getting married would make things easier, but it came with its own challenges. He prayed for clarity for all the decisions he would have to make as he drove to his apartment to pick up a few things. He'd already packed a few pieces of clothing when he had stopped by earlier, but he took his time this time, grabbing his shaving equipment, toothbrush, hairbrush, and essentials. He added a few dress shirts and pants that he could wear to work at the center, and then loaded up his car. JD was making dinner when I woke later. He stood in the kitchen, cradling Hope in one arm while he stirred a pot of soup. Yawning, I issued an apology. I'm sorry. I didn't even hear her cry. No worries. She's been great. She helped me pick out all the vegetables. He smiled as he tickled her under her chin. Is there anything I can do to help? Not me, but you might want to check your messages. JD pointed a spoon to the machine. I didn't feel like it was my place yet, and I'm pretty sure they're all for you anyway. I wrapped my arms around him and kissed his cheek. For future reference, my messages are your messages, but thank you. As I pushed the button on the machine, I was surprised by the number of messages from friends who had been praying and then calling to congratulate my recovery. Tears formed in my throat. Wow, it never ceases to amaze me how many people were praying for me. You've been quite an inspiration to many people. He set a bowl down in front of me. And I hope you don't mind, but a few of them wanted to throw you a baby shower. I told them this weekend would be fine. That sounds great. The vegetable soup he set down looked warm and inviting. I've been praying too. JD set his bowl down and then sat across from me, still cradling Hope. You've got roots here, and I've started to put them down as well. I want to continue to see the center grow. The board has been running my company the last few years anyway, so I'm starting to feel like God is moving me here. Joy filled my heart. I hadn't even wanted to think about moving to New York, though I knew I wanted to stay with JD wherever he was led. I'd like to pray about it some more, but would you be opposed to staying here? I shook my head, my grin reaching from one ear to the other. I would have gone wherever God led us, but I can't tell you how happy I am that we're getting to stay here. I can't think of a better place to raise Hope. I smiled at the gathering of people in our living room the following weekend. Mine was not the typical baby shower, but I wouldn't change it for the world. My mother had arrived with a man, and she seemed happier than I could remember her looking in years. I'd have to ask her about that new relationship when I could. It was true I had been busy the last few months, but it was unlike my mother to keep something that big from me. Lexi and Scott had shown up together. JD had informed me that not only had Lexi accepted Christ, but that the two were now dating. I smiled at that answered prayer. Sandra, of course, was there, chatting with some of the girls from the center. Evidently, she had stepped in to help at the center while JD and I were at the hospital those 5 days. Though we had an office manager, I knew that Sandra had a place at our clinic as well, and I couldn't wait to discuss the idea with JD. The group was rounded out with Tina and a few other friends from church. "Well," my mother began, "thank you all for coming. Obviously, the baby is already here." Everybody smiled at Hope, who was fast asleep in my arms. But we thought this would also be a great time to get together and celebrate Callie's return to us. A round of clapping ensued. Of course, we did bring some things for Hope. My mother picked up a present. I stood and crossed to Sandra. "Will you hold her for a minute while I open them?" Hope already had a special place in Sandra's heart. Tears dotted Sandra's eyes. "Of course." She held out her arms. I returned to my chair and began opening the gifts and displaying them to everyone. After all the gifts were opened and the food was eaten, everyone packed up and left except for my mother, who was helping clean up, Tom, who was chatting with JD since my mother was his ride, and Sandra. Sandra wheeled over to the rocker I was sitting in, rocking Hope. "I wanted to say thank you." Sandra touched my arm. "For what?" She grabbed the bag off the back of her wheelchair and pulled out a rolled piece of paper. As she unrolled it, a gasp escaped my lips. The face of Isaac looked back at me. "Did you see him?" A soft smile tugged at her lips. "Is it him then?" "It's perfect." My fingertips grazed the portrait. "I used to draw a long time ago, and when you told me about Isaac, I knew I had to try to draw his portrait. I used your description and an old picture of Peter, his father, and myself. I was hoping I'd get it close to the real thing." "You got it spot on." I squeezed Sandra's arm. "Thank you for asking to see him and for giving me the description. I'll be ready to meet him when Jesus is ready for me. But until then, I now have something to look at. I can never thank you enough, Callie. I'm so happy I could help you. And I'd also like to ask you to be Hope's godmother. She's going to need strong female role models, and I can think of no one else I'd rather have." Sandra's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded her agreement. She said goodnight, took her picture with her, and headed home. My mother and Tom left soon after, and I laid Hope down for a nap. "Callie, I know we're officially married," JD said, hugging me, "but I feel like we missed out on having a real ceremony at our church. When I get back from New York in a few days, would you like to try again to have a real ceremony?" I smiled up at him. "I'd love that. Though I'm starting to wonder if I have bad luck with weddings." We both chuckled, and then I leaned against JD's chest, enjoying the security he exuded. JD landed in New York the next afternoon and took a taxi to his office. He had already finished the lease on his apartment months ago before he left, but he needed to hire a moving company for all the things he had placed in storage. Then he needed to tell the board members he was planning to stay in Texas. Lord, give me the strength and the energy for this. He climbed the stairs to his office, opened the door, and crossed to his computer to find a moving company. That needed to be his first job so that the movers could be packing up his storage unit while he did everything else. Once he had that lined up, he went looking for the board members. When the majority of them were assembled, JD cleared his throat and wiped his palm on his pants. "So I thought I'd give you an update on the center in Texas. Faith Pregnancy Center is up and running. We're starting rather small, but the word is getting out there and people are coming in. Of course, that's not why I asked you to meet me here today. I wanted to tell you that I'm not coming back to New York. I'll be checking in with you every other week through video conferences, but I'm going to be staying in Texas to run the center and be with my family." "We sort of expected as much," Fred nodded and pointed to JD's left hand, "especially when we noticed that ring on your finger." Relief flooded JD, and he told them all about Callie and Hope. 1 month later, I stood in front of the mirror and stared at my reflection. My brown hair was pulled up, and a few curly tendrils hung down, barely touching my cream-colored dress. I thought back to the last time I had stood in front of a mirror like this and shook my head at the difference. Life hadn't turned out the way I had planned. I was still losing the baby weight from Hope, so I wasn't at my ideal weight yet, but I didn't care. Junior partner was never going to happen. but I felt more fulfilled helping JD at the center and sharing my story with the women who came in. As I usually had hope with me, the little girl had also begun her own career in affecting others, even though she didn't even know it. I had, however, married a handsome, rich man, though not for those reasons, and today I was going to get to have the ceremony I had dreamed of. My only hope was that it went off without a hitch, unlike last time. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts, and I turned as Lexi, my mother, and Tina entered the room. "Are you almost ready, honey?" my mother asked. I smiled and nodded. "Is everything else ready?" Lexi nodded. "Yep, JD is standing at the front waiting for you, along with Scott. Sandra has Hope in the front row, and the food all got delivered on time, and it looks delicious." "The cake?" "Yes, it's here, and it looks great," Tina said. "Okay, well then, I guess I'm ready." I smoothed my dress one more time and then followed Lexi, Tina, and my mother out to the hallway. Lexi and Tina had both agreed to reprise their roles as bridesmaids, and to cut down on cash, they were wearing the same gowns they had worn last time. The bouquets were each new, though, beautiful bouquets of lilies and carnations. My own bouquet was made up of fire and ice roses and pink carnations. Tina and Lexi opened the doors to the sanctuary and paused before beginning their march down the aisle. As the doors closed again, my mother turned to me, pulling me in for a hug. "I'm so proud of you. You've grown into a better woman than I even could have hoped." "Thanks, Mom." I squeezed her back. "I'm thankful you never gave up on me." Moms don't give up on their children, ever. She wiped the tears in her eyes and then turned to open the doors. The music began, and all eyes turned toward me. I glanced to the front of the church where JD stood, smiling at me and handsome as ever in his tuxedo and pink tie. Taking my mother's arm, I marched toward him, glad to be feeling no pain this time. At the end of the aisle, my mother hugged me one more time and then went to sit next to Sandra, who was cradling a sleeping Hope. Pastor Tony smiled and addressed the small crowd. "Thank you to everyone for joining us once again. Hopefully we have no unexpected interruptions this time." Hope took that moment to let out a large wail, and laughter scattered through the sanctuary. Tony continued the vow renewal ceremony, finally pronouncing us husband and wife again. The crowd cheered as JD leaned in and placed his lips on mine. When the kiss ended, we walked hand in hand down the aisle, past our many friends and family. Yes, this wasn't the perfect day I had once pictured for myself. It was even better. The end.